The night air inside the Great Alliance base was cold and silent. The glowing ceiling lights gave everything a soft silver color. Astra Vale walked through the long glass hallway with slow, steady steps. She could hear her heart beating in her ears. A few hours ago, she had believed this night would be the most beautiful night of her life. She had prepared for weeks. Her people had worked for years for this moment. A bond between her and Kale of the Likari clans would bring peace between humans and the proud wolf-like warriors who ruled the outer colonies. But now, everything had changed. She had seen Kale in the ceremonial chamber, not standing beside her but whispering with another. The girl was tall, elegant, and from one of the strongest Likari houses. They were laughing softly, and Kale had held her hand the way he used to hold Astra's. He had promised her loyalty, but his smile told another story. Astra had stood there for a few seconds, frozen. She had not screamed. She had not cried. She had just walked away, her dress flowing behind her like a broken flag. The Great Alliance base was built at the edge of a quiet planet called Mirath. Outside the windows, she could see the stars shining over the dark sky. Ships from many species floated in orbit like tiny silver birds. She had dreamed of this view since she was a child, but tonight it felt cold. Astra's bond was not just personal. It was political. If the bond with Kale failed, humanity could lose its only strong alliance in the outer colonies. That meant fewer resources, fewer star routes, and more danger for her people. She walked past two guards in silver armor. They looked at her but said nothing. Her calm face fooled them. Inside, her heart felt like a storm. She reached a quiet wing of the base, the marking pavilion. The place where Likari chose their allies through ritual markings. Normally, everything was planned, discussed, and approved. But there was an older rule, too. If someone stood inside the pavilion during a ceremonial night, any Likari could step forward to form a mark with them. It was a risky act. Unplanned bonds could shake politics, break old rules, or build new ones. Astra knew that, and she walked inside anyway. The room was large and round, with white floors and soft blue lights around the edges. In the center was a raised platform glowing gently. A soft wind from the ventilators made her hair move across her shoulders. She took a deep breath. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes were clear. She wasn't here for revenge. She was here because she refused to be weak. If Kale had chosen someone else, she would choose herself. She stepped onto the platform. A soft tone echoed through the base. It was the sound of the marking pavilion being activated. Somewhere in the base, every Likari would hear it. It was a call, a signal that a human had stepped forward to be marked without a planned bond. No one moved for a long moment. Astra stood alone in the center, her heart racing. What she was doing was bold, maybe even dangerous, but she did not step back. Then, soft footsteps echoed in the hallway behind her. He entered the room without a word. He was tall, taller than any Likari she had met before. His black cloak flowed behind him like liquid night. His silver eyes seemed to hold a quiet strength, calm but deep. Most Likari she had met liked to show their power loudly. This man didn't. He didn't need to. Astra felt a strange chill run through her. She did not know who he was, but something about him made the air itself feel heavier. He stopped in front of her, only a few steps away. The lights reflected softly on his dark hair. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and steady. "You are standing where only the brave stand," he said. "Are you sure about this choice?" Astra lifted her chin slightly. "Yes, I am. Even if you don't know who will answer the call. I'm not afraid to make my own path." His silver eyes studied her for a moment. He gave a small nod, not of pity but of respect. Then he stepped forward and raised his right hand. A small beam of light appeared between them. This was the neural mark, an ancient Likari system that linked two allies. It was older than any modern treaty. Once the mark accepted both sides, it could not be undone easily. But it wasn't just about power, it was about trust. The system didn't bond people by force. It only connected those who truly accepted the bond. Astra placed her hand in the light too. The room filled with a quiet humming sound. Like a heartbeat of the stars, across the base, lights began to blink. Technicians in the command room jumped up from their seats. On the big central screen, a crest appeared, a golden wolf wrapped in starlight. It was the royal crest of the Likari. Everyone stared. This was no ordinary warrior. This was the Alpha King himself. His name was Orion Drake. ruler of the Lakari clans, leader of the outer colonies, and the most powerful figure in the alliance. He was the one who decided the fate of entire star systems, and now, before everyone could react, he had marked a human envoy without a single word to the council. Whispers filled the corridors. It can't be him. Is this real? Why would the Alpha King choose a human? Astra didn't know what to think. Her heart raced, but she didn't let fear show. She looked up at Orion's calm face. His hand was still gently holding the light connection between them. You could have chosen anyone, she whispered. He looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said softly. And I chose you. Minutes later, the ceremonial alarms went off. Council members rushed toward the pavilion, their formal robes swaying behind them. Kale was among them. His face was pale and his eyes were wide with shock. Astra, what have you done? He asked in a whisper that trembled. She didn't answer him. She didn't need to. The councilors bowed their heads slightly to Orion as he stood on the platform. No one dared raise their voice to the Alpha King. He didn't speak much. He didn't need to. His presence filled the room like a steady flame. Councilor Mira stepped forward. Your Majesty, is this official? Orion's silver eyes did not waver. It is. The room filled with silent gasps. Once the Alpha King declared a mark, it became law. No council could undo it. Astra Vale, a human envoy from Earth, was now officially bonded to the Alpha King of the Lakari. Kyle lowered his gaze. His plan to choose another partner for power had fallen apart in a single moment. Astra felt a strange calm spreading inside her. She hadn't planned this. She had walked into the pavilion to stand for herself, not to be chosen by a king. And yet, here she was, no longer a quiet envoy at the edge of a political game, but standing at the center of it. As the crowd whispered around her, she lifted her head and met Orion's eyes. There was no fear there. Only the quiet strength of someone who knew exactly what she had done. The marking light between them slowly faded, but the bond remained. It was invisible now, a soft connection at the edge of her mind. She could feel his calm presence like standing under the stars after a storm. He turned slightly toward her and spoke in a low tone. Your choice tonight will change everything, she nodded. Then let it change. Later, when the pavilion was empty, Astra walked out into the night air. The stars were still shining over the horizon. She wrapped her arms around herself and took a deep breath. The air felt different now, lighter, stronger. She had entered that room alone, unsure of her place. She walked out with the entire alliance watching her. Behind her, footsteps echoed. Orion Drake joined her on the balcony. He did not touch her. He simply stood beside her, his cloak moving softly in the breeze. You didn't choose me because of power, she said. No, he replied simply. I chose you because you stood where others feared to stand. Astra looked out at the stars. For the first time in many years, she felt like her choices truly mattered. She wasn't a piece on someone else's board anymore. She was her own power. And somewhere deep inside, the stars themselves seemed to whisper that this was only the beginning. To be continued. The next morning, the Great Alliance base was louder than it had ever been. Every hallway was full of whispers. Every council member, guard, and officer was talking about the same thing. The unexpected mark between Astra Vale and Orion Drake, the Alpha King of the Lakari. Some called it destiny. Some called it a storm. But everyone knew one thing for sure. Nothing would ever be the same again. Astra stood in her room, staring at the glowing star map on the wall. It was a map of all the connected colonies, Earth in the center, and around it the Lakari systems like rings of silver. Just yesterday she had looked at this map as a diplomat with no real power. Today she was at the center of the most important bond in the galaxy. She slowly touched the small mark glowing faintly on her wrist, the sign of the bond. It wasn't a chain. It wasn't a lock. It was a quiet warmth, a gentle reminder of what had happened the night before. And somewhere in the corner of her mind, she could still feel him, Orion. His presence wasn't loud. It felt like standing under a calm night sky. Strong, steady, unshaken, she had no idea how to face the world now. But she knew one thing, she would not run from it. When Astra walked out of her room, the hallways were full of people. Some looked at her with surprise, some with respect, and some with doubt. She didn't let their whispers shake her. She walked straight to the council chamber, where the most powerful leaders of both humans and Lycari were waiting. The chamber was round and grand, with tall silver pillars and a shining floor that reflected the blue lights. At the center stood Orion. He wasn't wearing the dark cloak from the night before. He now wore a formal silver robe with the Alpha King's crest. His calm expression did not change even though dozens of eyes were fixed on him. The council chair spoke first. "Your Majesty," she said carefully, "we did not expect such a decision. A mark between a human envoy and the Alpha King is unusual." "It was my choice," Orion said. His voice was deep and clear, reaching every corner of the chamber. "And Astra's." A soft murmur spread across the room. Orion turned toward Astra then, not as a king commanding a subject, but as someone standing beside an equal. She took a step forward. Her heart beat fast, but she didn't let it show. "I didn't plan for this," she said honestly, "but I will not be treated like an accident. The bond happened because I stood where I chose to stand. If you call this unusual, then maybe the future should be unusual." Her words hung in the air like a spark. Some council members looked surprised. Others tried to hide smiles. Orion gave her the smallest nod, a quiet sign of support. A representative from one of the Lycari houses stood up. "With respect, Astra," he said, "our people are proud. The Alpha King is not just a leader. He is a symbol. Many will not accept a human standing at his side so easily." Astra met his eyes, "Then let them see why they should." The room fell quiet again. For years, humans had been treated as clever allies but never equals. The Lycari were stronger, older, and far more powerful in the stars. But in that moment, Astra's steady voice held something different. Not power, but conviction. The chair looked between Orion and Astra. "Then we must prepare," she said softly. "The bond is already known across the systems. The first public address must be today." Later that afternoon, the grand balcony of the base was filled with lights and banners. Journalists, officers, and citizens from both species filled the viewing platforms below. News channels across the stars were ready to broadcast the moment to every colony. Astra stood behind the curtain, her hands held together tightly. She wasn't afraid of speaking. She had spoken in meetings before, but this was different. This was the entire galaxy watching. Orion stood beside her, tall and calm. His presence felt like a shield, not because he was protecting her, but because he believed she didn't need protecting. "You don't have to say what they want to hear," he said softly. "Say what you believe." She looked up at him. "Why did you choose me?" "Because you walked into the pavilion without fear," he replied. "You didn't wait for permission to be strong. That kind of courage is rare." Astra took a deep breath. She wasn't here because of Kale anymore. She wasn't here because of betrayal. She was here because she had made a choice. When the curtain opened, the bright light from the balcony hit her face. She walked forward slowly, every step echoing in her ears. The crowd was silent, waiting. Orion spoke first. "Last night a bond was formed," he said clearly. "Not planned, not arranged. A bond chosen freely by two people. A bond between species that once stood apart." Then he turned to Astra. "Astra Vale stands beside me, not as a servant, not as a symbol, but as my equal. Her strength is proof of why humanity belongs at the table of power," the crowd whispered. Cameras flashed. Astra stepped forward. "I know many of you are surprised," she said. "Some of you may not believe this bond should exist. But for too long, humans have stood on the outside waiting for someone to give us a place. I didn't wait, and I won't. I didn't walk into that room to beg for power. I walked in to claim my voice. And I will use it to build something better, not just for my people, but for everyone who believes that strength is not about where you are born, but what you choose to stand for." The silence that followed was deep, and then and slowly a wave of soft clapping began. It grew louder, spreading through the crowd like a warm wind. Orion's silver eyes met hers, and for a moment, she felt something she had never felt in any council room before, true respect. But not everyone was happy. In a quiet corner of the base, Kale stood alone. He watched Astra on the balcony with a bitter expression. He had thought she would cry. He had thought she would be powerless without him. But she stood there brighter than he had ever seen her, and beside her was the Alpha King. Kale understood then that he had lost more than a bond. He had lost the chance to stand beside someone who had always been stronger than she looked. The next few weeks passed like a storm. Meetings filled every day. Council members visited from distant colonies. Many Lakari houses tried to question the bond. Some offered quiet support. Some tried to test Astra's resolve with complicated questions and heavy expectations, but Astra didn't break. She studied harder. She learned their customs, their politics, their language in deeper ways than before. She listened. She spoke when it mattered, and slowly even those who doubted her began to respect her. Not because she was bonded to a king, but because of the strength in her own words. Orion never spoke over her. He spoke with her. When she led a meeting, he stood silently, letting her voice fill the room. That was the way true power was shared. One evening, Astra sat in the quiet garden at the center of the base. The stars above looked close enough to touch. She thought of where she had started, a young envoy believing her worth depended on someone else's choice. And then she thought of now, a woman who had changed the course of 2 nations by walking into a room. Orion joined her silently. "You've changed them," he said softly. She shook her head with a small smile. "No, I reminded them to change themselves." He looked at her then, not as a king looking at a subject, but as someone who had found his true partner in leadership. Not chosen by bloodline, chosen by courage. The final test came when the council gathered to sign the new alliance treaty. For the first time in history, humans were not just guests. They were equals. Astra and Orion stood at the long silver table. The treaty glowed softly as both sides placed their hands on the mark of unity. Leaders from both species watched in silence as the ancient seal shined. Orion turned to Astra. "You walked into that pavilion alone," he said quietly. "Now look where you stand," she smiled softly. "I didn't need to be saved. I just needed to choose." The seal glowed brighter. The crowd erupted in applause. History was written that day, not by a warrior, not by a king, but by a human envoy who refused to stay quiet. That night, as the celebrations echoed through the base, Astra stepped onto the same balcony where she had once felt unsure. The stars stretched wide above her, bright and endless. She closed her eyes and breathed in the cool air. She thought of Kael, of the night of betrayal, of the pain that had once burned inside her. But it no longer hurt. It was simply part of her path, the beginning of a story she had rewritten with her own hands. Orion joined her, standing quietly beside her like before. No crown, no throne, just a steady presence. She turned to him and said softly, "It wasn't the mark that changed everything." He nodded. "It was you." Astra looked back at the stars. Once, she had believed she needed someone to give her strength. Now she knew the truth. She had been strong all along. The end,